So today we're going to speak about documentation and assessment for our early childhood learners. And the purpose for documentation and assessment in an early childhood classroom is to complete that cycle of instruction and planning and teaching and assessment. So there's this continuous cycle where assessment is informing how we plan and how we teach, and then how we teach and how we plan is informing what we assess. It's also there to monitor children, to deepen our understanding of each child and the DAP surrounding that child. And it can also be a screening to sort of identify children. Um, and there's also a program level benefit of assessment and documentation. What are the strengths of our school, of our class? Uh, what should we be working on? The final purpose here, and it's perhaps one of the most important for documentation in the early years, is to make the child's learning visible, to share it with others, to be able to demonstrate the learning that is taking place. And there's that word, to provide data for families and other stakeholders. I don't know why this is coming up in reverse. So, what do we document? Our standards provide a guide for, and there's an interesting spelling for determining, sorry, what to document. So we document what we are trying to teach. We document there's that alignment between planning, instruction, and assessment. We document that we are teaching what we said we would teach. Uh, so when we're trying to determine when and how to document in an early childhood setting, we should ask ourselves, why is this something that I'm recording? Why am I making a note of this? Why am I keeping this artifact? Why is it important? Why is it significant? What does it mean? What learning is occurring here? How is this something that I need to note now so that I can extend upon it? And how does it link to the standards? How does it link to the outcomes that I'm measuring? So, for our youngest learners from birth to two, those infants and toddlers, remember that with any kind of standardized assessment, there's really no reliability or validity in those. For example, an IQ score for an infant isn't something that predicts future uh, performance. The most important predictors for our youngest infants and toddlers are measures of the home environment, measures of family interaction. That means that in a childcare setting or a preschool setting, our careful observations are very important, that we are documenting the motor skills, the social, emotional skills that we see, and the cognitive skills that we see the child display. This is a place where having a guide for what to observe based on things like checklists of developmental norms, that can be a useful tool. But it's important to remember that there are a lot of individual differences in between child to child that fit within overall uh, typical developmental ranges. So there you are going to see uneven development. Children develop at different paces and in different paces within a child at different domains. For our older preschoolers, they also have uneven development. One child may be developing more quickly in large motor skills and the other in language skills. They do not have uh, very sophisticated test taking skills. They are limited and emerging in their language skills. They can be sensitive to demands in the environment. So if they know they're being tested or assessed, that can impact how they react, and they can tire quickly and become distracted easily, and they may not be too into tune with what that assessment is. Uh, they may not have any interest in doing well on an assessment, uh, and would rather do something more interesting. And that's one of the reasons that for young children, authentic assessment is so important. Uh, we don't have there's a standardized assessment for young children is very limited in what it can tell us, and it's really more important to measure what children are actually saying and actually doing. One of the things I say is that if you want to know if a kindergartner can tie their shoes, the best way to do that is to say, "Hey, tie your shoes for me," instead of giving them an interview about how would they tie their shoes, or giving them line drawings on a standardized assessment to demonstrate how someone ties shoes. Let's see you tie your shoes. That's an authentic assessment of the actual ability to perform at this task. So, to conduct authentic assessments, we spend some time observing children over time. We're taking anecdotal records where we are summarizing what we observe. We're collecting other data too as we observe. So, we may keep actual artifacts or take photographs of children's artwork or their writing skills, or uh, write down statements that the child said. Um, we're going to collect these data over time, and our findings are going to inform our future curriculum instruction. So, authentic assessment means that our assessment is based on what children are actually doing. So, some questions that should guide our authentic assessment. One, how is this information that I'm gathering here is it going to be useful? It's important that our assessment is intentional and purposeful. We're not just we're not making a scrapbook, we're making a portfolio. We're not making a poster about what a child does, we're making a documentation board. We're not just collecting anything. We're collecting things that demonstrate the child's development in those different domains that show how they are performing in terms of standards. Um, we should also consider when and where the observation should occur. So, do you observe only inside, or should you also get some observations outside? Do you observe only right before lunch when children are hungry? Those kind of questions should be thought through and intentional. What are the best way to document what I'm particularly interested in, and who am I going to share these findings with? So, some examples of some different assessment strategies. One are those observations that could be anecdotal records, which are summaries after time. It's less likely that teachers are able to conduct running records where they observe and make observations in real time. But if there's a possibility for that, then those running record observations are often more rich and detailed than the more summary like anecdotal observations. We collect work samples in children's performances. We may ask them to repeat things like nursery rhymes or sing songs, ask them to name attributes. We meet with them and have little mini conferences where they can tell us things that they know. And we can use developmental checklists, photographs, videos, time samples, and event samples where we record how long a child uh, how long does this child on a given day participate in art activities? How long do they participate in the blocks? Event samples where we only record instances of when a child does something. How often does this child have an aggressive act with other kids? Sociograms where we make sort of uh, a chart of the classroom of who interacts with who spends time with who plays with whom. Art examples, children's own self descriptions. And we can display these with things like documentation boards where we post the child's work and photographs of the child and quotes of the child on a board or a wall. We collect them in portfolios over time. A portfolio is a collection of those observations and artifacts, those examples of the child's work. We want to make sure that we're dated for those. We want to keep examples of the child's best work, which shows uh, how how well they're doing. And we want to keep the best portfolio systems use some standard indicators that we get the same indicator for every child, but also some individual indicators for each child, which sort of showcases that child's unique abilities and their unique strengths. So if this child is a child who uh, particularly loves to build with the blocks. Maybe we have some photographs of their buildings in there. And we can also have student-led conferences where the child uh, meets with the teacher and the parent and others to sort of work them through the portfolio or the documentation board and talk about their examples and what they learned in that process. Now, as we're taking those boards or portfolios or student-led conferences and we're sharing them with others, especially with parents, they can become sort of the backbone for a parent-teacher conference. Let's sit down and talk about the things we've collected in this portfolio. Um, the most important thing about this collection and being able to communicate this collection is that these materials were selected in intentional ways. They demonstrate something. There's some purpose for them being here. And one of the ways that we record that for ourselves and that we're able to communicate that is through the captions that we write for each of those photographs or language samples or pictures or drawings or artifacts, whatever. Um, and these are most powerful when we use the actual language of the standard as the statement to caption with. So if a 3-year-old standard was uh, the child will mix blue and yellow and produce green, if that was an art sample, then our drawing might say the child mixes blue and yellow to make green. This is a part of developing the visual ideas of color. So the captions themselves are using the statement of the standard, and you see what's happening here is we're really ensuring alignment because we are basing our activity. We're starting our activity planning on the standard and we're basing our assessment on the standard. And so both are aligned to what the standard is. And the standard is what we're actually trying to document. So when we use that as the caption, um, we're going beyond saying, oh, here is this child having a great time at art. Isn't that really beautiful how they put that together? And we're communicating the learning and accomplishment and progress that was made that example demonstrates. So that helps us to both be intentional in how we select those things and to communicate not just why this was selected, but what does this say about this child's progress and development and where they are today? What are they demonstrating? What is this evidence of? Now, a final purpose of assessment and documentation. So you can think about formative assessment, which is sort of that assessment as we go along that's informing us in how we teach and what we teach. So one of the purposes there is almost feedback to the teacher. Oh, I see that I have to spend some time talking about this, or oh, I see everybody got those concepts. Summative assessment is that assessment at the end, and it's as often used as standardized assessments. It's not as developmentally appropriate for our younger children to use those sorts of summative, especially standardized assessments. But a third purpose is what's called screening. A screening is using an assessment tool to identify some aspect of development where early intervention might be needed. So this child might have a special need. And so screenings are often not an in-depth evaluative sort of diagnostic tool. They're often very surface, very easy to do. You can do them with a large number of children very quickly, and you're just looking for that sort of red flag that then a professional who's uh, maybe a special education professional who is tuned into to making diagnoses with young children would do a more in-depth diagnostic with that child who's been highlighted by that screening. So, just as we have summative and formative assessment, we also have screening and evaluative assessment to identify children who, with the screen, that may have those special needs, and then the evaluative assessment, which goes into more depth to further document that. And finally, as we're thinking about share that documentation with families, the guiding question is how can we communicate with families to really establish a partnership that's focused on that child's best interest as we move forward.